This is Nathan Cannon. He's our VP of Software Development at ProStar GeoCorp, and I'm Dan Colby. I'm the Senior Vice President of Product. And some of you may be familiar with us through the Industry Experience Program. We also have done a few things here with the Geo Forum. We've also involved in, we work with a lot of the students. We do have an internship program also at ProStar GeoCorp, where matter of fact, Michael was an intern, but he's now a full-time employee of ProStar GeoCorp now. So anyway, I'm just going to give a quick intro. Nathan is going to do all the presentation of the material for the class. But what this one is about, as you guys probably already know, it's about open layers, and it's leveraging open layers for creating dynamic web applications. And just to give you a quick little background, ProStar, that's really our forte. We're really about what we call, I'm going to switch to the next slide. And I'm just going to introduce this term, and if you guys haven't heard of this term, neogeography. Has anybody of you heard of that term? Anybody here? You have. Okay.
30 seconds ago.
It's not a new term, really. It's actually been around since the 90s, which is kind of interesting. But really, it's the next generation of what we call geospatial tools and web services for the masses, right? So a neogeographer is someone who builds applications for the non-GIS user. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it. But it's looking at it from two different perspectives. A lot of us are used to looking at it from the technical perspective or the development side of our brain, where we're looking at it from using Esri tools, or we have to be experts in Art Catalog, we got to be experts in, converting data and, manipulating things, and so you got to be an expert at this, where a lot of the users in our society today are just average users. They're used to using their navigation systems and those kind of things, and Google Maps. So I'm just going to read this quote, and it's, and I was going to put after it Dan Colby, because it was my quote, but I'm just going to read it anyway, and Nathan too. But while geographic information systems remain expensive programs restricted to the highly trained specialists, which are us, right? It's you guys, right? Tools like navigation systems, weather maps, Google Maps bring easy-to-use mapping tools to the public. So neo-geographic techniques have demonstrated to web and mobile developers and to the public the possibilities of map navigation opens up the floodgates of interest. In other words, we're bringing GIS out of the closet. And so the Openlayers project, which you're going to learn about today, and you're just going to kind of scratch the surface, right? We're just going to just barely get into it, but we're going to give you enough tools, enough arsenal of information for you to leave this class. And after we're done, even though we have this 4:30 stop point, we're going to be here for the next half hour or 45 minutes or however long you guys want us to be here. And so the Openlayers project is pushing the envelope with new and advanced functionality. So a lot of things that you see in the web environments today are based and are driven from that foundation of Openlayers, believe it or not. And so the workshop provides an entry point into this mindset, and it'll get you armed with the information you need to leverage it. And so closing with this, and you see this light bulb. There's two sides to this, because it's actually very, what I call, from the user perspective, you got to make it easy, make it friendly. So that's the design side. So sometimes we got to open up both hemispheres of our brain, where a lot of times we're used to only using one, and so we need to look at both. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Nathan, and he'll just kind of go from here. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, folks. So we have constructed this course in a way that it's going to give you very surface level information, just enough to arm you with enough information to know how to create web maps, right? Just by using Notepad. All you need is a text editor and a web browser with an internet connection. You can create very powerful web maps, right? That is the current state of the technology. And when Dan mentioned neo-geographers, like when Google came in about 10 years ago, when they released this web mapping technology, boom, there was a shift in paradigm. People were able to access information without having to know anything about, nodes, polygons, geometry, geodatabase, those complex things. Information is right in your hand. Right now, mobile technologies and web has brought the GIS out of the closet, like Dan had mentioned. So before I go and start going into the contents, I just want to make sure that you have all this information. I know some of you have laptops and some of you don't, but that's fine. I'm going to go open each one of these files and walk them one by one, line by line, so that we understand what the content mean and how to create web maps, right? So before we begin, I just want to talk about Openlayers a little bit. Like Dan mentioned, it's a segue. It is basically open source JavaScript library for displaying dynamic map in web browsers, right? And it's just like Google Maps and Bing Maps, but the speciality or one special attribute of Openlayers is like it's specifically designed for GIS savvy users, people who are like into doing GIS type web development, like masters of GIS. Google API and Bing API and stuff like that is going to create like basic maps, but Openlayers can do a lot more. It's big and complex, but yet it's very powerful. And it implements all the required things a web developer could need to create a very powerful WebGIS application. And like I mentioned, it not only covers GIS-related concepts, but also it kind of takes the HTML and it puts the power to the developer to create and manipulate the HTML elements, which we'll look at here pretty quickly. And one of the very important aspects, and we will cover this over and over through this presentation, it is a tile client, and we'll go over that, what it means, like the reason and the rationale behind why things are really quick in the web world. For example, you open Google Maps, boom, the information comes in, right? And you add layers, boom, it's very fast, right? It's because it's tile client, and it's a mechanism of accessing the information and presenting it in the web browser. And when we talk about tiling, most of the technologies follow like Google Map tiling conventions, which means if you take the web space, say for example, if you take the web browser, and if you take the window, web window, the entire window is subdivided into multiple tiles, right? And each tile will have a size, like 256 by 256. That is the convention that Google follows. And these are some details on tiling, and it starts from zoom level 0 and it goes all the way to 22 zoom levels. And for the most part, all the tiling services follows or uses web Mercator projection. It's like a type of projection coordinate system, which is specifically designed by Google at the beginning, and it's designed to taking the bandwidth consideration for optimizing the performance to serve information in the web, right? On the other end, there is other standards like Openlayers Street Map standards, which follows like what they call Slippy Map tile names or XYZ tiling convention. And as you can see, if you make a request in the web browser using XYZ, meaning XY is the designation and Z is the zoom level. And now before we go any further into the presentation, we just want to get into action by creating a simple map, right? Like I mentioned, all you need to create a simple map is a text editor, a web browser, and an internet connection. And for this presentation, we're going to use Notepad++ as a text editor because it's got cool features like syntax highlighting, syntax folding, and all that. But you guys don't have to be restricted with Notepad++. There are other cool development environments like Visual Studio, Eclipse, NetBeans, and so forth, which can offer a lot more. But for demonstration purposes today, we're going to stick with Notepad++ because it's kind of simple and easy to use. Okay, it's time for action. So I'm going to go open up Simple Map. And I've highlighted the Simple Map file here. It's a simple HTML file, and you can see the file size is just 1 kilobyte, right? I'm going to go right-click, and I'm going to open it in a browser. Boom. There is a map right there. And you can see this is an OpenStreetMap, and you can zoom in and out, right? Pan around. Simple map with map navigation features And we were able to create that using just a 1 kilobyte file. That's all it takes. Now let's go ahead and investigate the contents of the file to see how it was created and what is going behind the scenes to make this possible, right? So I'm going to go open this in Notepad++. This is all it is, guys. This is the entire content of the simple map HTML file, right? So to begin with, here is, you can see doc type HTML, meaning like, we are utilizing HTML5 technology, which is the technology that came after HTML. And it's got a lot of additional capabilities that it can offer on top of what traditional HTML can provide. And this is on the head section. You'll have meta tag, the script tag. This is where the actual magic happens. This is where we include the Openlayers, the Openlayers API. And you see, it is the source information is calling this API from this website. And it's basically a JavaScript file, a compressed JavaScript file that we are referring to our HTML document, right? And when we open this map in the web browser, all it does is, when the page gets rendered, it's going to that source and it's downloading the JavaScript API. And all these these tools, these navigations that you're seeing is happening from that JavaScript file. So that is the Openlayers library. That is our source file.
And just real quick, maybe for those maybe not aware of it, Openlayers is open. So there's no licensing fees. It's free to use. Right? And it's done by the Openlayers project. And so the beauty is you can build your own applications. If you want to build your own mobile app, or you want to build whatever you want to do, or build your own kind of like mapping and using this as the framework, Openlayers is a good way of doing it without being subjected to any kind of licensing or developer fees or things like that. It's all open and free.
That's a very good point, Dan. Actually, I have a slide that covers that. And there are different ways to refer this particular JavaScript API into this HTML file, which I'll be talking here in a few seconds, right? And then there is the style element. This basically describes the size of the map. Say, for example, like, here we said 100% and 100%. So the entire screen is filled with the map. Say if we say 50 by 50, only half the page will be filled with the map. It is how to stylize your web page, and that's what that is. And then the script tag, this part we'll visit here in a second. And before that, I want to touch the body. The body is where the actual div, this is your map. And this is basically saying HTML, this is this portion where you create this div, and you have an ID called simple map. And then you have onload, and you refer a functional call in it. So what happens is when the page gets loaded, immediately after the page is loaded in your web browser, this onload function gets executed, meaning it goes to the script tag and it's going to call this function called init, right? Once it calls that function and the function starts executing, we are creating this map variable. This is an instance of the map that we create, and then we add a layer to that map, and then we map zoom to extent. And that's basically the operations that's happening. I know you said like you don't have experience with using APIs and JavaScript, and for now, just follow my lead. And there is more to this, like, when we talk in terms of like objects and instances and stuff like that, most of the traditional object-oriented concepts, and we don't need to go into the detail as long as you know the syntax, like how to write certain statements, and you're good to go. So basically, that's what happens here. And then, like I said, in the script tag, when we refer the Openlayers API, there are multiple ways to do that, right? Let's go to the PowerPoint presentation again. And okay, so we saw this is how we referred, but there are other ways too. So here there's option 2 and 3. And option 2 is exactly same like the option 1. But instead of using HTTP, you can see we are referring or calling it on the local folder. So basically what we need to do here is, there's a bunch of references that we put together by the end of this PowerPoint slide that's handed over. And you can go to the Openlayers website, download the Openlayers source code. You can store that in your local folder or wherever that's hosted, the application. And then you can refer that using this way. And the third way is the same. You need to download, but instead of calling it from this particular folder, you're accessing it from a lib folder. The only difference is these two OpenLayer source files are from different folders. And what makes the difference is this one's, the option 2 is a compressed folder. It's a compressed format. So when you open the application, when it's trying to download or when it's trying to access the Openlayers API, it's going to be pretty quick, right? And the third option, it is not compressed. It's got a lot of other information. It's got the source file. It's got all the references. So when a developer, like Dan mentioned, wants to play with the Openlayers source code, right? Want to experiment with the original source code to create additional features on top of who's got that skill set, programming skill set to be able to play with the Openlayers source code, they can basically use this option.
So your point here, for those that aren't familiar with coding, right, it might sound really overwhelming. If you're interested in learning code, this is an excellent place to start because it's at the rudimentary level. I guess we're going to say it's at the entry level side of it. And so if you can start to understand some of these concepts, in this and understanding how to do some web coding and things like that, it's just don't let it scare you, I guess is what I'm getting at. But for those that do have coding, you're going to say, okay, this is a piece of cake stuff. But I just thought I'd mention that because it's really a good entry point if you have that interest for sure.
Okay, I've got the download references for you guys to try out the option 2 and 3 over here. So now we want to talk about now that we created a simple map, right? And we investigated or went through the contents of what makes that map and saw how we can, refer or the Openlayers API into the HTML document. We want to touch base on the fundamental basic concepts of Openlayers. And this not just applies for just Openlayers, but for if you want to use Google Map API, Bing Map API, or any map API for that matter. It's the fundamentals or the building blocks are based on the same concepts. Number one, map, right? Anything that you do on the web browser, any information that you see is built on top of a base class or base object called map, right? And you add layers. Number two is layers. Anything that you add on top of map, right? All the information is, again, there's an object within the API called layers, right? There are different objects within the layers. Like layers can come in different ways, like different data sources. It can be a WMS layer, WFS layer, vector layer. It can be stream as from a shapefile, whatnot, right? GIS has so many disparate and different ways of, handling information. And once we have the map, we add the layers. And the third one is the control. Any action that you want to perform on the map, like you want to add a layer panel, you want to add zoom button, you want to add lat long, anything like other than layer, any actions that you want to perform is all under controls. So that is the fundamentals. Anywhere you go, any mapping API that you take, this is the building block. And there are a lot of other objects as well, but I just want to cover the fundamentals in this workshop. We said, there is Openlayers workshop can be held for 3 days or couple of days. There is so much of information, And the community has done a phenomenal, fantastic job in developing this open source API. Sky's the limit. And but we want to touch the fundamentals so that you guys are aware of, like, you know, what's required to build the basics. So before we get into the next slide, I just want to go ahead and open up a simple map with a layer added and some controls added. Right? I'm going to open this in the Chrome browser. Now that you see, we've added a control called layer panel that shows, like, you know, OpenStreetMap, and we added a layer called OSGeo WMS layer, right? And I'm going to go ahead and open the file. It is the same thing. We have a head, we have the script the same way, and we have the style, and we have a script. The only difference is inside the script, we initiated the map. We've added the OpenStreet layer, and on top of that, we've added a new layer called OSGeo WMS. We call OSGeo WMS. And the only difference between, you can see, this is an OSM layer. It says layer.osm, and this one is WMS layer, like layer.wms. Like I mentioned, there are different ways to access layers, right? And different sources can provide layers. But this particular layer that we added is a WMS type layers, and I have a separate slide during the end of the presentation that specifically goes into the details of what this type of a layer is and what all these mean. Like when you type in some URL here, when you type some layer format, all these information I'm going to go in detail, right? And after we add this layer, this is where we add to control. Even though the code looks like, you know, really big, these are all comments. Anything green that you see on the screen are comments. And specifically, we've added as much comment as possible so that when you want to play with this, you are equipped with a lot of information. Say, for example, this is a layer switch control. What does it do? It displays a table of contents from map. This allows the user to switch between base layer or to show or hide layers. So we've put all the comment, all the information about the code right on top of the code so that you guys, when you open the document, you know what it does, right? And not only that, we've also added reference. You click on this hyperlink, it's going to take you right to that Openlayers API to show you the details of that particular, like, you know, the code. Same thing. This is another control that we added. It's called mouse position control. It is going to basically display the geographic coordinates on the map. So let me go back to the map. When I hover my mouse on top of the map, you can see on the map, right-hand bottom corner, you'll see the coordinates, right? At this point, I just want you guys to make an important observation. I'm going to switch this layer from, like, you know, OpenStreetMap to OSGeo, right? It changed the layer. I'm going to hover the screen. On bottom of your screen, you can see the coordinate kind of changed, right? See, right now it's displaying the coordinates in one coordinate system, and now it's in lat/lon. Okay, there is some relevance to that. We're going to cover that in base layer, and it's all, like, you know, because the concept of coordinate systems is really important when we're trying to build map. Very often, or most often, when people are trying to explore the APIs, Openlayers API, okay, I found the source. I want to include that source. You copy paste the code from somewhere, and you overlay on top of, like, you know, the base map, Google map, or whatever. Information doesn't show up. 99% of the chances is because the coordinate system doesn't match. And there is a couple of HTML files that I've created that shows you how to detect that error and also how to rectify. Say if you encounter such situation, what you got to do when you use Openlayers API to be able to rectify and then get everything into one coordinate system. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint slide, And we've covered the basic concepts. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is base layers and overlays. Again, we are slowly trying to build the map. At the end of the session, we created a simple map. Now that we've added 2 controls, and now we are going to add a couple more base layers and overlays. Slowly, we are going to build different components of the map. And by the end of the workshop, I just want to create a lot of layers and some additional controls to give you a feeler of building the map from scratch. And it doesn't take a lot. All you need to know is be aware of the Openlayers API and get to know how to use it, right? Even if you're not completely, if you don't have complete programming or background, that's still fine. As long as you know how to utilize the information, you can build really cool, rich maps. That is the objective of the workshop by the end of it, right?
You give me a point. One thing we find that even with a lot of people from our company, a lot of us have never been trained in this stuff, because when we say neo-geographers, some of it you can't be taught. You have to teach it yourself. You have to really go in, and you really have to kind of dive into the material and kind of just learn, right? So a lot of the stuff that we've learned, even Nathan will speak to it too, has been just through self, teaching, right? And going in and just looking at it. So it's going to take some of that drive to go in and start looking at it, but this is a very good entry point for that.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'm going to go ahead and read this real quick. I don't want to spend much time on the slide. We'll go to the HTML document, open up a base layer, and then start investigating the contents of the document. So base layer is a very special kind of layer, right? And it's very special in the sense because whatever goes in the base layer, it determines the map properties, such as projections and zoom levels. In the previous example, when we clicked OSGeo WMS layer, you saw lat long. On the other layer, you saw a different coordinate system, because the base layer dictates the coordinate system of the map. The 2 sources have different coordinate references. So it's important in the context, say if you have a base layer in Web Mercator projection, right? And you're trying to bring a WGS 84, 4326 reference coordinate system on top of it. If you do it directly, it's not going to overlay. So it's really important to know what your base layer settings are, or what dictates the actual coordinate system of your map, right? And a map can have 1 or more base layers, just like we saw in the previous example. We had 2. And but only 1 can act as an active base layer. Say if you have 10 base layers, whatever that's active, whatever you clicked and that's visible, that's going to basically dictate the coordinate system of your map, right? And all the other properties that goes with it. And in addition, if you have more than 1 base layer, the first layer that you add to the map will be tagged as a base layer. By default, say, I'm going to go back to here. Okay, you can see we have map, and we added OSM layer. And then we went ahead and added another layer called OSGeo, right? So in this scenario, the first layer that you added, right, which is the OSM, is basically going to be a default base layer, right? Unless and until specified. Unless we write some code to change that, by default, when you open the map, the first layer that you add is going to set as a base layer, right? And the next is overlays. Anything that's not a base layer is an overlay. And can there be a scenario where we don't have any base layers and we have all overlays? Yes, there can be. If you imagine a web map editor or an end user who just want to add, remove layers without having to have any base layer as a reference, they can still do it. But we have all those examples created for you. So let's go ahead. It's time for action. So open base layer overlay, and then let's open using Google Chrome. Okay. Now you see, I'm going to open the layer panel. There is base layer, OSG or WMS. I just added this as my first layer in my HTML document, so that became the base layer. And we have two other layers added as an overlay, which is we pulled this from census, and you can see the counties and the states are acting as overlay, and you can turn on and off. And let me go back to zoom out. Then I'm going to go and open the content using Notepad. And then again, the same steps. You create head, style, you refer the open layers, and then again, the script, you have the function. We added, created a map object. We added the OSGeo WMS layer, and then we added OpenStreetMap. And on top of that, we added two layers, like census state and census county. And like I said, you'll see this type of layer being added repeatedly in this workshop. And this is a type of layer called WMS layer. And on the comments, I've basically put together everything that you need to know about, what is the source and where it came from and all that information, so you can go back and refer to the original source. And again, there is a separate slide in this presentation that talks about what all this, say how to build all this and all this information, right? So this is how it's done. So this is the code or magic that happens behind the scene. This is the code that you write to enable us to see the states and the counties layer. And then finally, we added two controls. And then we map to the extent of the map, right? And at this point, I would like to go ahead and remember we talked about tiled client. And I kind of emphasized that point at the beginning. And that's what makes this map and streaming really fast. Now I want to go back to that point and revisit that. And I'm going to go ahead and open Tools, Developer Tools. And those of you who are not familiar with web development, this Developer Tools is kind of like a nice way of inspecting the entire HTML content, and also kind of testing your API. Say if you write a code and you publish a map and something's not working, and you can always use the developer tool, and there are a lot of things here, and then to cover this is kind of like out of scope for this workshop, but I'll give you a flavor of it. So there are development console that shows all the warnings. If there's an error, it'll basically show here. Okay, this is why your map is not opening type thing. And there is network. Here, basically, you can see all the interaction between your web and the backend servers, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start zooming in. I just want you guys to observe what's happening here, where it says recording network activity, right? Let's go ahead and start zooming. Did you see? So when I click the zoom button, let me clear this and do one more time. I just want you to observe this. Okay. So what's happening here is, you see, I'm going to go click this, right? Openlayers is a tile client, meaning it knows, it's basically taking this map extent, right? It's calculating the screen, and it's dividing the screen into multiple small chunks of tiles, right? And it is basically creating a request for each tile, right? And it sends to the server. And the layers that we are using here are coming from OpenStreetMap, OSGeo WMS, and Census. So it's breaking this small tile section and it's sending that information saying, hey, these servers, send me the information. Send me the tile for those maps. So it's basically kind of like, creating a request and response mechanism, and it's building up the map for you. An important observation here is like if you look at the time, right? The time it took for that for the entire web to make this request and get the response here is like 249 milliseconds, right? It is in the order of milliseconds, right? So it made 48 requests. You can see, I'm going to clear this and then do it again. It made 48 requests. The reason why? Because the size of the screen is not changing, meaning the number of tiles which is composing that entire screen is the same as 48. So Openlayers already calculates. And that's where when I said, like, when you do the script, when you refer the Openlayers API, the code is all there. So that is what is basically performing that magic. So if you take all the 249 milliseconds times 48, it's less than a second. So that's what makes this whole thing happen. So say you had 100 layers, say for example, and after the end of the presentation, we'll show you a more enhanced version of this map that we put together for NC State, using we just took the Openlayers source code and we kind of enhanced and we kind of added on top of it to make it create a cool web application. And say if you have, we've added a lot of layers in there. Say if you have 100 layers and 100 times 25 or whatever milliseconds is nothing. So that is why when you stack layer on top of each other, layer on top of layer, it is so quick. Another important aspect is I think I forgot to mention in the initial slide, but that's fine, I'll go back again, is here it says on top of GIS concepts, it also manipulates HTML DOM and to make asynchronous requests. This is a very important point. It is as important as tile client. Let me switch back to here. And you can see here, say for example, when you make a request for 100 layers, here we are kind of doing 5 layers, right? The application is not going to wait till the first request is complete, right? Simultaneously, it's going to shoot a request to all the servers, all the 5 layers, right? And simultaneously, it's going to fetch all the responses and create the map on the fly. So if you have hundreds of layers, it is instantaneously, immediately, it's going to start sending the request, 100 requests to the server, right? Within the matter of milliseconds, it's going to create all the responses, and it's going to construct the map on the screen, and that's what you see on the screen. And that's why it's so fast, and that's why it's so powerful, right? So all it takes to do that is one, maybe few lines, maybe within 25 lines of code. As long as you have the Openlayers reference in your script, within a matter of few lines of code, you can access the world of map. So I'm going to go back to basic concepts. Okay. Okay, before we head back to the map options, there are certain things that I want to still cover in the base layer and overlays, right? Remember we talked about coordinate projections, and I just want to go to the map, and I'm going to close this for now, right? And this is the base overlay, right? I'm going to go zoom back to the whole extent, right? And I just want all you guys to make this observation. Okay, I'm going to switch the layer from OSGeo to WMS, right? And you see this is right now OpenGeo WMS, and it's in lat-long coordinate system, right? And I'm going to switch to OpenStreetMap and see what happens to the state and county layers. Boom, it disappeared, right? And that is because, see the coordinate system? This coordinate system is in Web Mercator, and the census is in Latlon, which is like WGS84. And now since we changed to OpenStreetMap, the coordinate system, remember, the active base layer is going to dictate the coordinate system of the map. Since we changed the active base layer, the coordinate system of the map changed. That means now it's expecting all the overlays to be in the same coordinate system. Since the overlays are in different coordinate system, when it sends a request to the server, to the Tiger, right, it's basically going to say, hey, my coordinate system is Web Mercator. I'm expecting to return the tiles in Web Mercator. And the server basically says, I don't understand Web Mercator. All I know is WGS84. So it is sending out blank tiles, which is presented as just a pink, blank, nothing. So that's what's happening here. So let's go here and then see how to rectify that. Okay, one way to rectify that is, let's say if we, in our code, if we take this code, and if there is a way to make a request to that Tiger server saying, hey, instead of giving me my tiles back in the WGS84, can you give it to me back in Web Mercator? If we can make that happen, then I think, like, that's going to solve the problem. So what I'm going to do is, like, I've created another HTML called mixed SRS base overlay. So let's go open that up in Notepad, right? I'm going to go to that line of code. So here's where it is done, right? In Openlayers or in web mapping, right, just like in ESRI, we have coordinate system. I assume that you guys are familiar using ArcMap and stuff like that. Just like in ArcMap, when you right-click the layer control, you go to the coordinate systems, you have all the different types of coordinate systems. In web world, when we want to do define coordinate systems, there are certain standards, which is called OGC, but we can talk about that in a different session. Open Geospatial Consortium has put together a set of standards or a naming convention or a code for all the different coordinate systems, right? So it is called EPSG followed by a certain name, number. And for Web Mercator, right, the code number is 3857, right? So here in my code, where I create that census states and county layers, and I am going to add two variables here, two parameters saying SRS, Spatial Reference System, EPSG 3857, right? I just added that here, meaning when I make the request, I'm going to call, and then I'm going to basically say, hey, send the tile in 3857. So let's go ahead and open this file in Google Chrome. Let's see what happens. Still, it doesn't show the map, because again, there is a critical things that I want to you guys to understand, right? Let's investigate a little bit more. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to the tools, developer tools. Okay, let's go. This is the request that's made. Let's go ahead and take the request, and then let me go to the header section. Okay, so basically when you open the developer tools, or it's basically a way of looking into what's happening into the browser, right? Just like we saw, it created so many responses. When you click on a specific request, it's going to show the details of the request. Usually in web mapping applications, there is this client and there is a server, right? Your computer or this web browser is a client. It is basically sending a request to the server, and it's getting a response, and what we are seeing on the screen is basically the response, right? So this is the request. There are a lot of information here, but you don't have to focus on all this. But I just want you guys to look at this query string parameters, right? These are the information that's sent to the server. And in the SRS, you'll see EPSG 900913. Okay. We specifically asked the Openlayers code by passing that parameter to basically say, hey, send me the tile in 3857. But still, it is requested in 900913. The reason because 90, that number, and the 3857 is exactly the same, right? When Open Geospatial Consortium was trying to put together some references for all the coordinate systems, at that time, this web spherical Mercator projection was not formed. It is something that Google came up with. When Google released Google Maps at the beginning, they came up with this projection to optimize sharing of information via internet, via web, right? Taking bandwidth and all this into consideration, they came up with some projections, right? And they gave a number called 900913. I'm not sure why. They gave a fancy number. And then later, when OGC adopted to that thing, they gave a different number, like 3857, right? And now both are the same. For most part, a lot of the servers, ESRI, even Openlayers, Google Map API, you can switch between these two numbers and still you're fine, right? But the Tiger website, I was trying to construct this, like, the presentation material, and I was kind of like put all this, and boom, write SRS, and then boom, you're done. And then I was like landing into the problem, boom, why is it not showing up? And then I was trying to read into the Tiger. Let's go back to the Tiger website, but the actual source, like for a second here. This is where we got that information, right? And again, I have this reference in the workshop, you can get it. And you go here, this is like, I'm gonna click here, census 2010. And this is all the layers that's available. And we are just showing the states and counties. You can basically copy paste the code, change this variable from states, right? The layers states to any of the other layers, and basically you'll see that layer streaming out. It's that simple. But here, let's go ahead. Once you have this, there is this tag called WMS. You click WMS, right? It's going to show you the list of all allowed, or the server or the Tiger server, what are all the information that it can provide. It's called capabilities document, WMS capabilities document. What layers to publish, what coordinate systems that it allows to, to share. And I'm going to go back all the way down. See, you can basically get your map. We are getting as a PONG because of transparency, but you can make a request to JPEG, right? If you go here and then say format image JPEG, you will get a response back in JPEG, right? And if you don't want it to be transparent, you just say false here. It's going to be false. So I'm going to go back here again and then go down. And in the layer section, you'll see the CRS, or the spatial reference system, it says 3857. So that means any web server, say for example, you just found a WMS source, and by OGC standard, they should have a website that has WMS. You click that. By OGC standard, all the WMS Git capabilities document has to follow the same pattern, right? So if you look at the CRS tag, it's basically going to tell you what's allowed and what's not allowed. This tells us this Tiger source doesn't understand 900913, right? But our Openlayers, the intelligent application here, right, when it's creating the request, like I said, that's why base layers are important. We are using OpenStreetMap as our active base layer, meaning whatever it's going to send, it is going to send the information or the request based on the projection of the OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap follows 900913. So that is the reason why it is doing that, right? Now let's go ahead and quickly fix this. The way to fix this is like, one good thing about Openlayers in this API is like, any problem that we end up, or like any problem that we encounter, there's always a solution. Somebody already encountered it, like, they've already built a solution around it, so we don't have to. You just Google, like, SRS problem not showing Openlayers, there's tons and tons of documents, like, so no worries there. But what we can do is, like, we can pre-configure our map to understand or to make the request in 3857, right? So what I'm going to do here is, I've already created that, like, options. You construct this object called options, and here I say projection is 3857, meaning instead of using 900913, now Openlayers is going to use 3857, which is the same. So I've created this option. It's not enough to just create a variable, but I have to associate that to the map. That's when my map will also take that as my projection, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go here and then say, comma, paste, save this. So now I've included the option with the projection set on my map. Now let's go ahead here, and then let's close this. I'm going to close this for a second, and then I'm going to refresh the map. Bingo. Now you have all your layers. So 99% of the time, when you guys take this information, when you use Openlayers, and when we are trying to stack or the layers one on top of each other, it is going to be this. So I thought, like, even if it takes some additional time to put some emphasis on this to show you how you encounter this type of an issue and how you can quickly fix, how you can detect and quickly fix this, right? And now, I know we've been talking a lot about map, code, and all that. I would like to take a few minutes now to go to the actual Openlayers API. They say API. This is the actual Openlayers API document. And here is Openlayers, and here is map, right? Anything, all the code that you see here, whether it's map, whatever it says, Openlayers.map, Openlayers.layer.osm, right? How to use that, what goes inside that, how to create that, all the information is presented here. For example, let's quickly look at what map means, right? It's an interactive map embedded within a web page, right? There's all these set of properties that you can use in the map, right? And here, every object will have this thing called constructor. It basically shows you how to construct that line of code, right? And if you scroll below, it says constructor. So basically, how to create, like, it's called variable map, new openlayers.map, right? And then here is the div that goes here, and it has all set of options that goes next to it, right? Here, map and options. Whatever goes within this codes is the div. Let me go back. And options is the options that you set on the map. Let me go back here. Simple map is the div. Remember, at the body section, we created a div element called ID with ID simple map, right? That ID goes here, and any options that you put on the map goes here, right next to it. And what are all the allowed options is right here. You go on top, anything that you see here, right, are all the allowed options. But we'll kind of talk about a little bit of like, how to use all the different options like here in a bit. But are you guys okay? Do you have any questions? I just want to take some time to see if you have any questions at this point. Okay, I'm going to continue with, okay, this is a section that specifically talks about map options. And like I said, there are various ways to put map options in here. I'm going to go open this particular, it's all the same. For the consistency purpose, I just kept the code base the same. I'm adding additional lines of code on top of each document that I showed. So here, I've commented these two lines called additional properties called map extent and restricted map extent. I'm going to go uncomment that, and I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go open that in Google Chrome. Let's see what happens. Boom. The same map with the same code. Now it's zoomed to a particular area. We just made this to zoom to North Carolina State University. And just to demonstrate the power of using options, in the options, the only change that we made between the previous HTML and this one is to add these two lines of code. It is called max extent and restricted extent, right? Let me go back here, and then there are two options that we are investigating here. And the only difference between maximum extent and restricted extent is it is the way of allowing the use. Say, for example, in the previous examples, the map was showing the entire world. Say you're building a map and you don't want your user to see the entire world, and you want them to zoom to a particular area and then just restrict them to just that area, right? So to be able to do this kind of cool stuff, there is a lot of options given here, like all the properties within the Openlayers documentation. If we go through details, it's all there. I'm just showing you a very basic stuff of what it can do. So what it does is it's basically zooming the map to a specific extent, and it's going to lock you out. Say if you try to pan the map, you cannot pan the map because we have restricted the map to that extent, and we made the map to zoom to that extent, right? You can still zoom out, right, and zoom in. But once you zoom in, you cannot just move the map. So all these type of, say for example, you want your end user to create a map, add all the layers, and have them only zoom so farther, like 10 zoom levels, or 3 zoom levels, or zoom into so many zoom levels. All those types of things can be pre-configured and pre-customized under the settings. Bunch of code, a few lines of code under options, and you add your options in the map. Boom, your map is going to respond that way. So that is the power of adding different options to the map. And how are we doing with time here?
Yeah, so we are finished, I think. We can hang out. And I think we want to thank you for.
Oh yeah, thank you. But I would like to kind of take maybe if you guys have time, maybe 5 or less than 10 minutes to go ahead and finish this presentation. Now that we kind of went through this whole document, it's kind of exactly the same. All the maybe 2 more files that we have is exactly the same. And if you have any questions, feel free to kind of chime in.
You guys mind sticking around?
I would like to actually see it, but of course, feel free to leave if you want. If anybody wants to leave, they're free to leave. No, just.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, there is two more things that I want to cover here, right? Basically, remember we talked about WMS. All the layers that we added is kind of like, WMS type layer. What is WMS layer, right? And then I'm going to show you another example, two HTML files, just like vector data. And then pretty much we are like, the end of the workshop. So here, at the very bottom, like all the data that we added, like all the tiger data, the census data, is using WMS, right? Let me quickly switch my screen to Openlayers, documentation, right? And then I'll go to layers, and then there is a thing called WMS, right? So under, if you see open layer.wms, there's got to be a constructor, and the constructor is basically going to show you how to basically write that code, right? Here it says it needs 4 parameters to construct that object. One is the name, which is the first, right? This can be anything. You can see, like, if we rename this to census 2000 tiger states, your map's going to show that, right? It's the display name in the map, right? And then the number 2 is the URL, right? This is the URL for the tiger. This is the server, actually. When our map makes a request, it is basically contacting this URL, the server, to basically asking it to return the tile, right? And then these are the WMS parameters, right? These are the parameters that the server, Tiger server, can understand. Remember, we added like SRS 3857 and so forth. So it is the same thing. It is the WMS can understand these parameters. Yes.
Which? Okay, I see map options. That's
okay.
All you got. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's right. Let me go ahead. Good point. Okay, there you go.
I'm with you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, these are all the options, right? WMS options. Again, in here, the list of all options that's available for the end user is here in the reference, and I also opened that here. So what are all the parameters that you can pass here? Right now, we are calling layers, format, transparent, SRS, but there's a whole lot of parameters. You can create a very rich web map with all the information available to you. All you need to, I'm just repeating this again because all you need to know is this information is available and this is there, and the hard work, the code, the API is already being done. So you just need to leverage that, and you need to know how to be able to use that in your code, right? Now, if you go back to this document, it says like, all this. Like you can have your own styles. You can have time parameter. You can have bounding box saying, I just want to see the information within this particular bounding box. All this information, right? And then finally, this is the open layers called options, right? Anything that you see here or anything that you see under the layer, all this can be set into map options to configure the map the way you want it. So that is basically the WMS, constructing WMS. I just want to kind of like give you a flavor because like there is a lot of different layers. If you see, there is like Bing, boxes, Google, GeoRSS, OSM, vector, WMS, XYZ. So you can create layers in all these different using protocols, right? And if you wonder how, all you got to do is go to the documentation and just kind of like follow through the constructor and see how to construct. And if you type in like, Google it, how to construct WMS layers, there's tons of examples and like hundreds of examples literally. And I'm also at the end of the presentation, I've added references for examples. There is literally Openlayers got like more than 500 simple web examples that talks about all these different things. So it's left for you guys to explore. And so that's what you create. And then here I've added like, a couple of things to explore. Like transition effect is one. Like say for map, I'm going to go open this in Google. Okay, I think this is a cool point to observe. I just want you guys to observe. When I zoom in, see what happens to the state layer, right? I'm going to zoom in again. You see, when I zoom in, the map refreshes, and the state outlines, there is a blank map, and then it fills the screen, right? Now it disappeared. Now it's trying to fill the screen with the information. So instead of having that, if you want to give the user a smooth transition experience, instead of it disappears, it stays on the screen and it gradually goes back, So there is things that you can do to your transition effect. And if you go back to the documentation, right, and I think it's in the grid. I think it's resize. Now I'm going to refresh the same map. Now watch what it does. Like when I zoom in, it still stays there and it smoothly transitions to, so you don't see that disappearing and appearing effect. Whenever I zoom in, it stays there and it smoothly merges to the new screen. So this is just an example. So when creating rich web mapping application to give the end user a perception of navigating to a cool, nice looking map, there is a ton of things that you can do, right? All those things are listed under Openlayers documentation, and you just type in Google enhancing Openlayers visual mapping thing like it. It's going to show you tons of examples, but I'm just sharing a few of the, kind of like what I felt is important to show in this workshop. So I just commented these like opacity, single tile, buffer. All these are like, additional things that you can do to enhance the user perception of how to stream the map, right? So opacity, simple. If you want to add like a transparency effect to your layer, right? It's going to make it more transparent. Say if you want to juxtapose two polygons, one is like, having a fill. Another one you want to kind of like, show it like, transparent, or one below other. So those things kind of like, can be achieved using all these parameters, right? So finally, I'm going to go back to the adding vector data, right? I'm going to go to the vector points and then open up in a web browser. Boom. Again, this is a map that's preset to North Carolina University, and you see all these points, and these points are created. It's not being streamed. It's not a WMS. It's not going to any Tiger or any other external source to get that information. It's just created inside the document itself, right? These are called vector points. There are other ways to stream vector information as well, like WFS and so forth. But you'll see, like, I move my mouse on top of it. It's showing the actual information pertaining to that map. So let's quickly go to that vector points and open the file. It's all the same information, but right from here, I added a few lines of code to make that thing happen. And finally, to add that layer, and you'll see like, I've added features, and then I've had, just like in ESRI, you always have a feature class. You have a geodatabase, and you have a feature class. And feature class will have features, and each individual features will have geometry, right? So basically, if you want to build a feature class, you'll take a geometry, and you'll create a feature out of it, and you'll put that in a feature class, and you'll put the feature class inside a geodatabase. Now you have a geodatabase, right? Similarly to that, here you have features. First, we are creating features, and then we are taking the feature and creating a layer out of that feature, and then we are taking that layer, vector layer, and then adding that to a map to show that in map, and that's about it. And this is the layer. Remember, we talked about map, layer, and controls, and then anything that you want to do on the map is going to be added like a control. So this hover, right? This hover, that you hover and then something shows up. It's an action on the map. So that's got to be added as a control. So finally, I go back here. I have a hover control. Again, entire documentation is on the how to use that, how to use all this is under the Openlayers API documentation. And it's shown here. And then you add a control, you add a layer, and you add that to map, you activate it, boom, it's there. So with that, we come to the end of what we want to show and share with you guys in this workshop. Basically, to create web maps using simple HTML document using JavaScript, leveraging Openlayers, and it's as long as we know how to read and how to utilize the wonderful work created by the Openlayers community, the whole world of map is in our hands. And thank you. One important information before we go any further, the recent, what I've showed, all the documentation that's listed here, right, in this presentation, is the Openlayers 2, the latest and greatest stable version of Openlayers 2, which is Openlayers 2.1.3.1, right? But after we start developing this new thing that came on called Openlayers 3, right? But we did not go because it does not have layer panel and all that, but it's conceptually the same. And if you go open up the Openlayers 3, it's still the same. It's map, it is the layers, it is the control. Syntax is a little bit different, but once you get a feeler and get the fundamentals, whether it's Openlayers 3 or whether it's like Google Maps or Bing Maps, it's all the same. Yeah, I'm going to quickly switch the screen here to what we did for NC State.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. It's okay.
And guys, before I hand it over to Dan, if you look like this entire thing, the Openlayers code that's written, this is map, right? Objects, map, and everything that's here is like layers, and everything that you see on top is control. But that's how basic that is. And we leverage this whole thing using Openlayers 2.13.1.
Yep, exactly. So this right here is what we call transparent earth. Just so you know, we have a lot of different clients that are both in oil and gas to agriculture, you name it. And so, but the users that use this system are people that are not GIS people. They are just like average. I mean, in some cases, we got farmers logging in. We're using our navigation system. So it's really just a simple app that we built. It's taking the concepts of what Nathan showed you today, but kind of putting it on steroids in a sense. But we built a lot of implementation on top of it. Not only that, but our server, even the server that we use behind the scenes is an open source server. We use GeoServer as an example. And then we build up on top of that because a lot of stuff is code that we can get in there and manipulate. But just really quick, just to kind of show you, like he saw, we do tie to other things like Google Maps for work and things like that, but we can switch over to streets just like he was doing. So these are all designed within that environment. Even back over to OpenStreetMap, which was the one he was showing you, right? And so this is taking that layer panel, but we've kind of designed it and made it our own, and we've added some additional stuff to it. But really what you're seeing here, the fundamental foundations is exactly what he was just showing you. So learning that is like critical. All this campus data, this is certain information that we've added. I'll switch back over to Google Hybrid just to do it, and I'll zoom in to give you an idea. And I won't go through a big presentation of this, but just to kind of show you idea of there's different bus routes, so the different types of layers that we can add. And we put all of our control panels up top. But as you guys start playing with it, you can create your own map, make your own buttons, make it, and get it fancy. Emergency management information. This is all data that comes, so that's streamed in through that WMS type functionality. So if you want to string in state emergency operations centers, historical data, if you scroll down here, just to give you an example, we have another area, and map services. You can start building out that layer panel. So that layer panel that you saw that is very generic, that you get directly from Openlayers, but you can kind of build your own if you're familiar with building out some of your own HTML and your own kind of web design stuff, or if you know somebody who's good at it that you can work with, you can kind of design your own kind of panels. So like here, I'm going to zoom out just to give you an example here. And I'll turn on weather. I don't know what's going on here right now. We'll see.
It's a little cloudy and sunny.
Yeah, it's nice here.
Oh, good.
And I'm not sure if we've activated the weather yet. Did we activate it? Do you know, Nathan? Or Michael knows.
Yeah.
Working.
Yeah, we're in the dev environment too, just to give you an idea. Yeah, so that took a minute to stream. It's coming from NOAA. It's coming in, all right? There it is. There's that big storm that kind of leaving the coast. So everything here is kind of interesting. You know, we can even then build things upon this, like map layers and searching and capabilities. So like a good example, if I want to search, you know, campus buildings, for example, if I don't know the value or I do, you can build all this stuff into rich web applications. If you can see here, we've got kind of a dashboard. I just did a search all, but just to give you an idea, if I want to go ahead and get to this storage shelter, right, and I want to map it, it's going to take me right to it, and it's going to highlight where that is, right? And just to kind of give you an example of how this, you know, works, right? And so there's so many different things you can do. There's different styles that you can add to, like the SLD files. Like I think Michael and them were playing around with some labels. I'm going to have them thin out that halo because I don't like it. I think it's too thick. But bottom line is it's playing around with it. And so one of the ideas, just so you guys know what we're doing here with NC State as well, is we create this NC State environment because the idea, and Ocon has kind of been our champion here on this more than anybody. He has. And what it is that we're going to eventually be moving this. We got this in our dev environment. We'll be moving this to a production server. And we're going to allow the students and any of you guys that want to have access logins. We have a mobile app that comes with this too. You can go out and collect data and collect information using GPS and on your tablets and phones and things like that. Take photos and post them to here. It's really cool stuff. So this is kind of interesting stuff that we're going to be doing. So a good example, I have a menu here. I'm inside, but if I'm on my mobile device, I have the same menu. And I can come in here and select a photo, and I can take it with my phone. And just like Facebook, you take the photo, boom, and in real time, you could have somebody back in the office watch that another user create real data in maps in real time. So we're doing some really cool stuff there. And so, but what Nathan just showed you, I just want to make a mention of this, is that what Nathan just showed you is so important, because if you can take the time to learn the fundamentals of Openlayers and just understanding how that works. If you notice, we didn't need Esri, we didn't need Autodesk, we didn't need Intergraph, we didn't need any of that, right? And we don't have any dependencies on anything. And so in our case, everything that we built here, even though we use a lot of open source, we wrote a lot of our own code too. And so it became kind of our application, right? And then we contribute back to the open source communities too. I always feel that if you're going to take, you should give too, right? You know, so if we develop some certain things, we're going to give back. I'm involved with OGC. I've been on those committees since the beginning. In the pipeline business, oil and gas, is what we call the Pipeline Open Data Standard. So we're really open. We're open people, right? And so when we say neo-geographers, right, we're talking about the next generation of geospatial professionals, and we really mean that. And so, because mapping is not just a bubble inside a company and a department anymore. It's changing. And if you guys can become the geospatial professionals today that are out there now that are graduating with master's degrees and what have you, they're in these positions and jobs as GIS managers, stuff like that. But you guys have an opportunity to not only take that knowledge base, but then apply it to the real world now, because our world is maps. It just is. But anyway, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us half an hour longer than you're supposed to. But I want you to know on your presentation that's there, at the bottom down there, you're going to have my name. I'm Dan, and Nathan, and our emails are there too. We encourage, seriously, if you guys have any questions, contact us. Let us know. We want to come back.